Very much, Adam, and thank you both to the Europa Demos and to the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. These remarks, the footnote is important. These are the personal views of the author. These are not necessarily the views of the IMF that I'm going to talk about. And what I thought would be interesting was to look at how we can better evaluate the Eurozone and issues connected with it in the light of the crisis that the world has been going through. So this is how I plan to handle it. A few brief words on how we assess the advantages and disadvantages of the Eurozone, of membership in the Eurozone before the crisis hit. How has the crisis affected our assessment? And what does this say particularly about the membership tests for the candidate countries? Now, there's lots of stuff in the literature on the traditional assessment of costs and benefits of monetary union. As we know, it creates a large area in which certainly the costs for trade and investment are reduced, and so one would get a boost to growth from these various factors if you were in a monetary union. Similarly, we would expect in the European context to have lower interest rates and a more stable financial environment. So these are clear advantages to countries. These were always considered to be clear advantages to countries for belonging to the Union. The cons, which all the literature on optimal currency areas emphasized, was that it's certainly harder to adjust to asymmetrical shocks without the exchange rate tool, and especially if the economy is not flexible. So a lot of this thinking obviously lay behind the various membership tests for getting into the Eurozone. So now let's see how this assessment is changed by the crisis. What have we actually learnt as a result of the last year and a half or so? Now, was membership in the Eurozone, and here I'm talking about the countries which found themselves in the zone at the start of the crisis, was membership a protection? Was it a contributor to the crisis as far as they were concerned? Or was it actually a straitjacket for getting out of the crisis? Or, of course, was it some combination of the three, as we will find? So let's look first at some of the factors that lay behind the Eurozone as a protection. Certainly, it has been, for the countries inside the zone, the common currency has been an anchor of stability, particularly keeping interest rates relatively low in the context in the continent. Secondly, all countries' banks have had access to a liquid market, thanks to the actions of the ECB. Obviously, balance of payments pressures have not been operating on the countries inside the Eurozone. So they haven't had to worry about reserve levels. The reserves are all at the disposal of the zone as a whole. And certain government borrowing costs have been kept down. That's obviously partly a consequence of the low interest rates. I think, in addition, we can say clearly that if we try and think of the counterfactual, how Europe would have coped with this crisis if it hadn't had if there hadn't been the common currency zone, it would look really quite chaotic, and it would have been a very, very difficult period for Europe. So those, I think, are some of the factors that indicate how useful the euro has been. Now, has the euro been a contributor to the crisis? Well, certainly there's two possible channels where it could have been a contributor to the crisis. One is monetary policy, and the other is financial policy. Now, these countries in the Eurozone have been hit by a sort of asymmetrical shock, in that those with the biggest asset price booms have had the biggest shock. Now, it's true that's not only countries inside the zone, it's also countries outside the zone which have been hit by that shock. For those inside the zone, clearly in the past, monetary policy has been insufficiently tight for those countries. That's not all this reason, but it's certainly part of the reason. One can say that some of the consequences come from having had a common monetary policy. Maybe we have assumed an unrealistic degree of flexibility in some of the countries in the zone. On financial policy, I think the zone, we can't really say the zone has contributed. What we can see is that all countries have been hit by the financial shock, essentially regardless of monetary arrangements. So I think we can absolve the Eurozone anything on financial policy. Has it been a straitjacket for countries in dealing with the crisis? Well, obviously, those which have been most badly hit do have to go through nominal adjustments of wages, prices and public expenditures, and certainly larger countries like Ireland, Spain are going to have to go through larger nominal adjustments on these things than they would have had if they'd had some depreciation of the exchange rate. So we are seeing the flexibility tested in these countries. The cost of running counter-cyclical policies, giving some more demand stimulus through fiscal, presumably is less now they're in the Eurozone because interest rates have been a bit lower. But on the other hand, because of the way the zone is constituted, some countries may have been worried about fiscal spillovers, which could imply a certain deflationary bias to the system. Now, I just want to... So I think summing it all up, the balance is positive. We do have a caveat here that the crisis is the worst parts of the crisis are not yet over, in the sense that unemployment is still rising, we are very uncertain about the fragility of the banking system, and so on.